Hi, I'm Shreya Srivastav and I'm a research fellow at the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy.
Hi, I'm Nisha, and I'm a team lead at the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy in Education. And in this discussion today, we basically want to talk about the renewed debate around the reopening of schools and the strategies involved for us to be able to make that decision. With the start of the new academic year since July, this debate has been renewed, it's been kickstarted again. And India is one of the few countries since the start of the pandemic where schools were the first to close and the last to reopen. In most states across the country right now, schools are not open in any way, shape, or form resembling what it was before. But as you know, this debate around the whole school reopening strategies very much have two sides. One is the education side and the other is the health side. So Shreya, could you tell us a little bit about the health side of this debate?
Sure, Nisha. So I think when we are talking about reopening of schools, we should not look at it in silo. And as we all know, there are different phases of a public health emergency, from prevention to mitigation to response, and finally the stage of recovery. So currently, what we are doing is we are, sort of trying to recover in terms of, recovery of the economy, and we are also opening up from like opening up hotels, gyms, restaurants and whatnot. So I think the issue of reopening of schools should be looked at from a recovery perspective. So I think we are not thinking about it a lot because I think it's convenient to just maintain the status quo. And so I think it's a fundamental question that we should discuss, that whether we need to reopen schools and how do we go about it going forward.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, on the education side, as far as this debate is concerned, there have been two paths, right? One is this sort of conservative approach that we've seen everyone take, I mean, the government take, and a lot of other stakeholders have also said, let's keep our children safe as much as possible. Schools not reopening is about keeping our children safe. But then on the other hand, if you sort of look at the evidence, if you look at sort of anecdotal evidence and like rapid assessments that have happened during COVID, students' socio-emotional and like psychological well-being has been affected so severely due to the lack of social interaction, right? As the moment schools closed, kids, I mean, they didn't have anywhere to play, they didn't have any interaction with peers or teachers. So that has obviously had a huge negative and adverse impact on students' mental well-being. And then if you look at the recent Azim Premji University study, they actually made estimates of learning losses during this time. And I think they found 82% of primary school students had lost at least one foundational ability in mathematics. And for language, that number was at about 92%. So then as far as this side of the debate is concerned, the question of reopening schools is really not about, whether they should be reopened or not. It's very much a question of when can we reopen, right?
Right, right. So you're absolutely right, Nisha, that if we look at even other countries, that so many people are actually prioritizing this and going ahead with reopening schools. So I would like to understand from you that currently we are having remote schools. We have adopted digital methods to conduct schools. So, do you think digital education has become an alternative and can be considered as an alternative going forward?
Yeah, I mean, this is again the question that's sort of on everyone's minds. And there are, again, two sides of the story. There is an entire group, people sort of in the ed tech industry who are very much about, digital is the future. This is the way going forward. This is an opportunity that COVID has presented us because we've all been forced to go online. But when you actually look at, again, anecdotal evidence, right? The fact of the matter is teachers, parents, students, everyone you talk to, they will tell you classes and like learning and teaching needs to happen within a physical classroom, right? And I mean, a large part of that is definitely the climate that you get, the opportunities for social interaction, peer learning, and the kind of relationship that develops between a teacher and a child. But there is so much also about like not being prepared with pedagogy to actually teach through a digital platform, right? Teachers were not prepared for that for sure. And even when the shift did happen, there have been lots of issues with actually training teachers adequately. So when you kind of consider all of these, narratives that have come out from actually speaking to teachers and students, the question of quality has, I mean, it's almost become like, if the child is able to have a device or has internet, then education is happening. The question of quality has almost become moot, because a large section of the population definitely does not have personal devices, right? And even if they did have computers and laptops and of their own and high speed internet, even then it's not an alternative, it's not good enough. But in our country, if you look at the actual statistics, if you look at the 75th round of NSSO data, for example, the average number of people that actually have access to internet is like 28% across the country. Of course, in urban areas, it's at around 42%, so it's much higher. But even that, right, that's nothing when you're talking about providing education, which is a universal right. So, I mean, given that, like, access is a huge problem. So when we talk about education happening on digital platforms, one is the aspect of teachers were ill prepared, students were ill prepared, parents were ill prepared. So therefore, quality has been a problem, and I don't see that going anywhere. And as far as this being a future, an opportunity for the way we deliver education in the future, inequity is the biggest problem. In a country like India, digital can't be the solution. There's just no way around it.
I absolutely agree with you, Nisha. Like digital education is one of the alternative, but I think a lot of state governments have been experimenting with certain alternatives for physical schooling as well, right? Like
Absolutely.
mohalla schools, like Mera Ghar Mera Vidyalay, a scheme which was launched by the MP government last year. So, what do you think about some of these alternatives? Have they actually benefited children? But at the same time, what about the safety of teachers who were involved during this?
Right. I mean, so with these schemes, I do have to say, I don't think that there is enough evidence in terms of the effectiveness for children per se, right? It hasn't been run systematically enough or long enough for us to say, yes, it was really beneficial for the child's learning outcomes, for example. But then if you look at, like, if you sort of compare that to all the problems and all the kind of issues that we've had with digital, right? So those kinds of things kind of get sorted out when you try to do these localized physical interactions between students and teachers, and if not teachers, some sort of older sibling or a volunteer from within the community. So for example, Mola schools, I think that was sort of the idea, right? If not the teacher can at a very localized level, you recruit volunteers who are then trained by a teacher, and then they teach, like, say, 5 kids at a time or something like that, and then the teacher kind of oversees the process with the volunteer. So I mean, I definitely think these sort of solutions have a lot more potential, even in the mid to short, like the short to mid term, as when schools are closed. It's quite interesting because these are solutions that have also been put into, say, the government's COVID guidelines, right? For like how should we sort of respond while schools continue to be closed, but they're not really happening. And another very genuine benefit that I see with this, and this has happened in places where Mola schools have opened up, is at least the teaching learning materials are getting to the children, right? So even if the teacher is not able to be conducting home visits with the students and actually giving them instructions, they are at least getting the TLM to the child, which is a big win as well, as like a, as a sort of like a starting point. So I do see that there is potential there. But then coming to the very important point that you brought up, right? Coming to the question of teachers and their safety. Um, so two things here. One is, yes, how do we ensure that the teachers are safe? And I think that's really a question for you, in terms of, I don't know, vaccination strategies or whatever it is. But also, we know that administrative burden on teachers has always been a problem, right? This has been a problem for as long as we can remember. So things like teachers doing election duty, teachers doing, I mean, just a range of different, running different schemes for the government, essentially. And then during COVID-19, a lot of teachers have been called into COVID-19 duty. right? And this has sort of led to that burden. So can you tell us a little bit about this COVID-19 duty of the teachers? What did they entail? And really, why did we have to turn to teachers in this time?
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out, Nisha. That's a very important issue that we really need to discuss. And teachers being, the center point of whole this debate. So, I mean, the huge problem with our country is the lack of resources, and this lack even, becomes bigger during such a public health emergency. And currently, during COVID-19, we have a lack of frontline workers. So teachers usually become an easy target for, such activities. So as you pointed out that, they generally do a bunch of duties ranging from election duties, census duties, even during religious festivals like Kumbh, they have they have been assigned duties. So yeah, some of these issues are there generally, but particularly during COVID, this becomes a little more problematic because, they are being exposed to the virus and not necessarily with the same amount of protection. So while they're trying to fill up that gap of frontline workers, not necessarily they are being provided that kind of protection, in terms of PPE kits, etc. And, for example, a bunch of duties that they have been assigned range from, conducting COVID related surveys, contact tracing, and even, in some places, they were assigned duties at a cremation ground. Where they were supposed to, check if a COVID appropriate protocol was being followed. Also, they were supposed to, maintain death records, etc. But, just imagine the amount of exposure they have, but not necessarily being given the same amount of protection. Also, there is a distinction between even the different categories of teachers, right? So, there in certain states there are permanent teachers, but at the same time there are, these probation-based teachers like, Shiksha Mitras in UP and Shikshan Sevaks in Maharashtra. So, and even like these teachers are on probation, even their pay scale is much lesser than, permanent teachers. And usually, since they are, additional sort of teachers, they are assigned such duties.
Right, right. And like you said, right, like why, I mean, because I remember reading this article, I think it was in The Wire, about teachers in UP specifically. I'm sure this has been the case elsewhere as well. But exactly what you're saying, teachers being called on COVID duty, basically being told that if you don't do this, you will lose your job or you will lose your salary.
Yeah.
And, then many of them actually contracting the virus and many of them succumbing to the virus as well.
Yeah.
So what sort of went wrong? I mean, how could we have prevented something like this from happening?
Right, Nisha. So as I was pointing out that, they are not necessarily given the same amount of protection, if they are even supposed to be present at the vaccination centers, because so many schools have been converted into vaccination centers. So even though, teachers do not directly have to play a role in that, but they are supposed to be present there and not with the same amount of protection. And when I was talking about these, subordinate category of teachers, so they even do not receive the same amount of medical benefits as compared to permanent teachers, and whereas they have to, play the same role when it comes to such duties. Even in UP, during election duties, as you were pointing out, hundreds of Shiksha Mitras actually succumbed to COVID. And even in Maharashtra, about thousands of Shikshan Mitras had basically released an SOS sort of thing to the government when so many colleagues of theirs actually died due to COVID while conducting, COVID surveys. Right. So yeah, this has been the case. And if we are, asking teachers to play the role of frontline workers, we really need to give them the protection that they need.
Right. So then, I mean, sort of coming into the third wave, then this should definitely be a priority, right? Because I don't think that I mean, I don't know, like, do you know if we're planning to do anything around this for the third wave?
I don't think so. Nothing that I'm aware of. And actually, even if we do not think of the third wave directly, even like in the current vaccination drive, teachers
Yeah.
are playing a very important role by, especially with helping with the vaccine hesitancy of people, especially in rural areas, in villages. And,
Mm.
teacher is a face which is, known to so many villagers, they respect teachers. So they are being used to help with this vaccine hesitancy, to provide information, to spread awareness. So even then they have to visit so many households where people are
Mm.
not vaccinated, and there also they are getting exposed. So I think the role that teachers play is going to continue during the current pandemic in so many different ways. So I think it's high time we really think about their protection as well.
Right, right. And yeah, I mean, sort of coming back to the question of schools, right? And how has this really affected the education? I mean, only imagine, there is, of course, some evidence, but we can only imagine how much doing all of these additional duties. And one is just in terms of time, right? How much time do you have in a day to do these other duties and then also teach children? But even like just the mental stress, the actual physical toll that it takes on you if they did get COVID. I mean, I can imagine all of this has only affected students learning by so much more, right?
Yeah, so as we see that, teachers have been playing so many different roles, but at the same time, is it actually impacting their primary function of teaching? So what do you have to say, Nisha, on that?
Yeah, so we did this study in December on it was sort of like a rapid assessment on how COVID-19 has impacted specifically students with disabilities. But we spoke to around 50 teachers as part of that study in 4 different states. And honestly, what all of them had to say, like the government teachers specifically, they did say that there was this additional burden of non-teaching duties that had been put on them, and they said that in combination with that, the fact that they didn't know how to use digital methods, and a lot of them hadn't received training for that. They were sort of saying the combination of those two things, even without them, it goes without saying, right, that has to have affected how students have been taught during that time. Um, and coming back to sort of your point on like contractual employees as well, right? So if you look at Anganwadi workers, so even prior to the pandemic, I mean, they play such an important role in education of children because they are, the primary source of sort of early childhood education in our country. Even though there are other departments delivering early childhood education, Anganwadi centers do. I mean, they, I think, reach about 8.4 crore children under the age of 6 years, right? But even before the pandemic, preschool education is just one of their jobs. And they were, like you said, one of the first set of workers, because they do have things to do around nutrition and health, especially with, pregnant women and young children. So they were definitely part of the first cohort of like frontline workers, right? And there was this interesting CPR study that actually spoke to about 71 Anganwadi workers in rural
Right.
Rajasthan, I think it was. And they like reported that yes, a lot of these essential services of preschool education, immunization, nutrition supplementation, they continued during the pandemic, but definitely the frequency and intensity of that delivery was affected. And in fact, I think 52% of that sample said that because of these additional burdens of COVID related work, they weren't able to themselves deliver any of the essential services. So I mean, I don't think we have a clear estimate on how much it has affected or the extent of how this has affected students' learning, but we can definitely say it's been substantial. I think we have enough evidence for that at least.
Right. Right.
So, now that we've sort of established that the situation is bad, right? If we were to come back to the question of how can we reopen schools, there are certain guidelines that have been instituted in other countries. I think CDC has a clear set of guidelines. I guess my question is, as far as India is concerned, do we have that? Do we sort of know when we will be able to reopen schools? Are we waiting for a certain situation or circumstance to occur and then we say, okay, now is the right time? Or where are we in terms of making that decision?
That's a very important question, Nisha, because as you mentioned earlier, that the question is not that whether or not we should open preschool, but rather how should we go about it going forward. So, one of the studies that the Lancet Commission India Task Force on COVID had conducted about reopening of schools, and it just came right in time before the academic year began. So, I think that conducts a very exhaustive study on this, while it brings epidemiological data from different countries. So then they look at the transmission rates vis-a-vis reopening of schools, as well as the risk on children of different age groups. So that study has brought up very important facts, and it can help us take this decision based on data. And as they say, data driven decision making should be the ideal way of going about it. So, one of the points that the Lancet Commission Task Force mentions is that there is relatively very little impact of school reopening on population-wide transmission rates, and so they brought examples, from Belgium, from Finland, Australia, Netherlands, and even New York City, where they say that once while in certain countries schools were reopened, in phases or in shifts, but for say in Netherlands, schools were reopened, full-fledged, with full strength, and still the transmission rates did not spike up due to that. So that sort of gives us an reassurance sort of thing, right? That this does not have a direct relation with reopening of schools. They also say that while we compare this with any other COVID appropriate behavior, like social distancing, and any other method, so even closure of school does not have a lot of impact on even avoiding transmission rates. Now we look at risk on children. So they say that especially younger population is likely to have very little impact due to this. And so if we going forward, if we first focus on primary schools and pre-primary schools, that can definitely help. Now, coming to India specific, guidelines and evidences. So the problem with India is that, it's diverse, and even, behavior is behavior, changes from region to region, and, it's really difficult to, come to one definite conclusion. So, even your social distancing behavior, COVID appropriate behavior ranges from places to places, how certain even schools are able to, adopt it and implement it.
Right.
So I think going forward, if we, make these practices, COVID appropriate behavior, mandatory, and, there was a suggestion that maybe we could take help from local administration, panchayats, with frequent hand washing facilities, with, sanitizing school campuses, and things like these, which can help and in going a long way towards this. And some recommendations that this Lancet Commission particularly, and even have been coming from different governments also, the guidelines that they have issued. For example, the Karnataka government recently issued guidelines for this academic session, and some of these things were, of course, people should follow COVID appropriate behavior. Campuses, buses should be well ventilated. Even, they should encourage more outdoor activities as compared to indoor activities. And the most important thing is that since we cannot vaccinate children at this point, we should vaccinate all teachers and staff members. So these are some of the suggestions.
Right. So definitely on this vaccination point, I'm going to get back in a second. But honestly, I read the Lancet Commission report, and I mean, I guess I hadn't engaged with the literature enough from like what had happened in other countries. But I was shocked to know that like outbreaks, in like from schools was not a common thing, that like the
Yeah.
evidence for that was so low. I mean, then it really does confuse me, because again, you spoke about data-driven decision making, right? And these guidelines sort of course, initially being conservative makes sense. There's no doubt about it. But then as evidence sort of came in and these guidelines were set in other contexts, I'm wondering, could we have had schools open in like remote rural areas for so many months, especially last year? Because until I think the second wave, most of rural India was kind of untouched by COVID, right? Like there were
Right.
at least large pockets that were sort of untouched. So I don't like, it's just that
Right.
really blew my mind. But yeah, anyway, sorry. So you were saying the vaccination strategy is sort of what's being said should be the main way to go forward, right?
Yeah.
Vaccinate the teachers and the school admin and stuff. Um, yeah, so with respect to this, though, you were mentioning earlier that there was something about mandatory vaccinations for teachers, right? And
Right.
something about how teachers were actually being asked to like get vaccinated mandatorily, and that would be then pegged to their salaries. Like if they didn't, they would lose their job or something like that. So what is this about? Where is this happening?
So particularly this is about an order from a particular district in UP where, teachers were told that they are supposed to get vaccinated mandatorily, and even their family members are supposed to get vaccinated, and they are supposed to share the certificates of like their entire family with the authorities. And if that doesn't happen, their salaries will be cut. So they kind of directly linked the this mandatory vaccination with their salaries, which of course would create pressure on them. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
this is and
yeah.
this is a strategy many state governments and even local administration. Particularly, this is actually happening at district levels where they are doing it with even other professions. From your taxi drivers to your street side vendors. That
Right.
you need to get vaccinated first, otherwise you will not be able to continue with your job.
Okay, so I mean, on ethical grounds, I completely understand and agree that there should be outrage around this idea of mandatory vaccinations, right? And even like pegging it to salaries and things like that. But at the end of the day, a vaccination is a public good, right? And each person, so like again, two parts of this question, right? So one is it is a public good. Me getting vaccinated is going to be beneficial for everyone around me or that I interact with, right? As much as it is going to be beneficial for me. I think at least that's how I've sort of understood this concept. And then the other thing is we're talking about, teachers continuing to be on COVID duty, the possibility of this impending third wave, and them needing to be secure. And again, are vaccinations not the best way to do it? So of course, the second one is a little bit unrelated. But as far as mandatory vaccinations go, is this okay? Is it an all right way to do something like this? What are your thoughts on this?
Uh, right. So, Nisha, this is really a debate between, individual rights versus public good. And we do have examples of mandatory vaccination in the past from other countries as well. But, currently for this COVID-19 vaccination, the government has been very clear about it that it's completely voluntary. And while different state governments have come up with, orders like this, like how I
Hmm.
gave this example of the UP district order. But even a similar thing happened, in Meghalaya, where, an order was issued that, taxi drivers cannot continue with their profession unless they get vaccinated. So the
Hmm.
Meghalaya High Court actually came up with a very strong judgment that forceful vaccinations do not find place in the law. So there, while there is no clear jurisprudence on this so far, it's really a matter of, because as you were pointing out, that while it does have individual benefits,
Hmm.
it also has public benefits as well. And once, a larger population gets vaccinated, herd immunity is achieved. So that could be the way going forward. But, as we have individual right to life and liberty, you cannot force somebody for medical treatment, and even people have the right to refuse medical treatment.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, it's really a matter that maybe the courts can decide that when you have to, balance between the two, how you should go about it. But the interesting point is that when the right to livelihood also gets involved, right, that's
Yeah.
where it becomes really questionable that, you cannot force somebody to get vaccinated on the cost of their livelihood. You cannot cut their salaries. You cannot stop them from, continuing their profession. So that's where I think the Meghalaya High Court stepped in here.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah. So then there's a very sort of clear, yeah. I mean, again, like I said, on a personal level, I do completely agree. It is unethical. There is a clear black and white for me as well. But it is one of those questions when you think about it from like a policymaker standpoint, right? We're sort of towards the end of whatever I can think of for, summarizing the debate. And I guess I know I've already asked this question, right? But you've spoken about the importance of using, data-driven decision making to kind of figure out exactly when we can open schools. So really, like the last question for me on the health side of things, when can we make this decision? Or what is the solution? When can we open schools? It's like the most broadest form of the question.
Right. So I think the question really is that how we go about this decision, right? Basically, so far, even a couple of states tried reopening schools, but they sort of faced a lot of backlash from, parents, students, and they had to, take back that decision. So I think this happens a lot of times when, the decision is sort of top down, and, it's not really consultative and transparent that how they are going about it. And especially when the decision is backed by data and evidence, how we were just discussing that, in other countries, reopening of schools did not have a direct impact on transmission rates, right? So here as well, if we sort of rely on data, go by numbers, and then take that decision, but at the same time we make it consultative and transparent, so that, parents are aware that, this is how you're arriving at that decision, and it's not, coming directly out of nowhere that you just decided to reopen schools. And, at the same time, there's a lot of public awareness needs to be made, communication need to be made about this. I think going forward, if we actually take this decision, this should be transparent and consultative and data driven at the same time. Also, Nisha, one question that I have been thinking about, since we talked a lot about, the role of teachers, and, how if we go ahead with reopening schools, teachers are going to play a key role, right? So what do you think some of the, major changes that teachers would have to go through in terms of, teaching methods, in terms of school management, for a smooth transition? Because, post-COVID schools are definitely going to be very different from pre-COVID schools. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think some of the things that have sort of come up are exactly what you were mentioning before, right? The sort of, can we localize it? Can we do Mohalla schools, or like, basically just small collectives of like 5 students with one teacher or one teacher substitute? In the sort of short to medium term, that maybe that's the way to do it. And what a lot of people have basically said is that when we think about what a post-COVID school will look like, right? While again, there is so much demand around sort of ed tech and digital being the future and stuff, sure, maybe we can continue to use that and find ways to do these sort of blended models for education that work. But it also, sort of try to preserve the like social space and environment that a school creates, because that's essentially how, at least in the current idea that we have of education globally, that's how education works, right? That kind of interaction, peer-to-peer learning, all of these sort of things that we've discussed before are very, very crucial to the overall development of the child after the sort of formal learning that maybe you can get from like reading a textbook, right? So with respect to that, I think so that's more in terms of like getting, the kids into school, into a physical school. Maybe you have to do it in batches or shifts or something like that. As far as the teacher's role is concerned, I mean, everything you touched upon in terms of COVID protocols that need to come into a physical school, right, once they reopen, I mean, I'd sort of be worried that that is all going to fall on a teacher. So what you said earlier about getting other authorities, maybe local government or, other basically people to be involved in that aspect of it. So a teacher can actually focus on the primary responsibility, because that primary responsibility itself has changed so much with digital. But also when you come back to schools, again, referring to the Lancet Commission report, right? One of the things that they talk about, a lot of other people talk about, is that when kids come back to school, it can't be, it can't be back to normal. It can't be, oh, we left off here 15 months ago, we're back there, right? We need to, one thing that definitely comes up is we need to shorten curriculum. So the goal of education of like finishing what is already considered very large amounts of content, that needs to be shortened for sure, right? Depending on when the school reopens. And the focus should really be about when kids first come back, assessing where they're at, seeing how much learning loss has actually happened. This could potentially have to happen at like the individual level, and then creating or designing a bridge course that focuses on, say, math and language, especially for the younger age groups, because that will then sort of help them, sort of catch up on the math and language bit, on the foundational sort of literacy, numeracy aspects, and then that will then, hold them in good stead when they try to move on to other subjects and things like that. So, I mean, the role of the teacher with just respect to their primary responsibilities is huge, right? So going forward, I feel like that needs to be kept in mind, which is why, like, I mean, this is why we sort of want to have this conversation, right? Because there's so many other burdens that are placed on teachers. We really need to figure out how to minimize that so that they can play this new, completely demanding role that is going to be asked for them the moment that kids come in. And like another thing that I do want to stress on, and again, it comes up in all of these, in the Lancet Commission report, it comes up in a lot of other places, but like the importance of pre-planning, right? You just spoke about how some states, like for this academic year, they suddenly announced that, hey, we're going to reopen physical schools, right? And you had like parents and students and teachers protesting because they were like, how did you come to this decision? And I mean, the fact that teachers are protesting means that they're not prepared. You haven't done enough pre-planning where they, I mean, one is they feel secure enough, they feel safe enough. And also if schools just suddenly open, this bridge program, this, all of these things we've been talking about for months and months, and that are in the government's guidelines for reopening schools. I mean, none of this has been done. So how did you make this decision? So I feel like the pre-planning aspect of this, it can't be stressed more, right? Like we need to start pre-planning on all these different things, the COVID protocol, on teacher training, building their capacity. And I think the last thing that has sort of come about is sort of like a best practice throughout the pandemic, globally and in India, is that in situations where teachers have been well embedded within a community and they've been given enough sort of autonomy and flexibility to work around the different challenges that the pandemic was throwing them. And most importantly, apart from the autonomy, they were given some sort of resources to support any sort of innovation or decision making that they felt was important. That has sort of resulted in good things, right? It sort of helped them teach better, it's helped them get materials to students, whatever that case might be. So exactly what you said, right? Make this process consultative and allow teachers to play a large role in that. And even once schools reopen, let it be like a localized decision. That's fine, that's more on like the decision making side. But then teachers should be consulted, and even in the classroom, how they want to go about bridge programs, how they want to go about assessment, all of these things, they should be allowed some level of autonomy and flexibility, to sort of figure out what's going to work for them, what's going to work for their kids. If they need additional support, can we give them those resources? Can we give them maybe additional manpower? I mean, these are the sort of questions that I think need to happen. And I think the only way that any of this can happen is if we pre-plan. So if it's not happening for this academic year, we think there's a third wave coming sometime, in the next couple of months, maybe end of this year. Let's plan for next year. Let's plan for the next academic year itself. 1 year down the line, will we at least be prepared then? I think that's really where I think we need to be moving towards.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Nisha. And I think we have lost some, golden months where we could have spent a lot of time on this pre-planning aspects. And now, since we are not ready, we are just, delaying this process of reopening schools rather. So, yeah, I think your suggestions are very useful. And I think this brings us to the end of the discussion. And I think going forward, the question is not really whether or not to reopen schools, but how to reopen schools and reimagine the whole infrastructure, reimagine schools, reimagine education in this post-COVID world, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one last point, coming back to one of the main reasons why we wanted to have this conversation is because this debate it's definitely not new. It's been kickstarted again. And a lot of the points we touch upon, of course, are based on like newer evidence than maybe what was presented before. But one aspect that we both definitely felt like wasn't being touched upon enough was teachers' additional burden, and the fact that if that is not reduced, a lot of these plans that we have for going forward, at least on the education front, are very unlikely to happen. And if we don't see a way to change that role that they have, then at least we need to protect them and keep them safe and ensure that they're not being forced into situations where basically the worst happens, right?
Absolutely agree with you.
Thank you. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I think this was super interesting and useful, and I'm going to stop the recording.
Same here, same, Nisha.